Hello and welcome, everybody. I'm so excited you could join me today for this wonderful interview. I am joined by the lovely Jana Kerr. She is an IAHC certified integrative nutrition health coach and founder at The Well Coaching. She serves exhausted Christian moms by meeting them at the well in the midst of their day-to-day and empowers them to love and care for their bodies so they can fulfill their God-given mission in this world. As a mom of three, Jana knows the struggle of not having enough energy to make dinner, let alone find balance. 8 years ago, Jana was able to shift her focus from the non-for-profit world to the health and wellness industry. Personal connection with her clients is the best part of her day, and she's passionate about giving them simple, realistic, and actionable tools. Oh my goodness, so wonderful. Welcome, Jana. I'm so excited you could join me today.
Thank you, Rita. No, I'm so excited to be here, for sure.
Yeah, I love it. If you don't mind, let's kind of just talk a little bit more about your own personal journey and maybe what led you to this place of helping people, especially with stress and overwhelm.
Sure. So, like my bio said, I was in nonprofit world for a while, and I think my journey really started when my oldest daughter was 1. We were feeding her, all the organic baby food, and we were taking such good care of her. And I noticed it's like my husband and I weren't taking very good care of ourselves. And for me personally, I struggled a lot with like the weaning depression, which I didn't know was a thing. I was commuting 45 minutes each way, working full time with my toddler. And I was not taking good care of myself. And it was a series of small baby steps, which is why I'm so passionate about little tiny baby steps that really led me to start caring for myself. And, I couldn't care for my daughter or my husband or my home if I wasn't taking care of myself. I couldn't perform at work, all these things. So, really coming to understand the beauty of, we have to care for ourselves before we can take care of anyone else. And so, fast forward to when our son was born, um, I was able to leave my full-time job and stay home. And I mean, I can touch on kind of my story about him now if you'd like, or come back to it later. But that's when I really got into the health and wellness world. I'd been learning all along over those years, but being able to be home with him, and then I went back to school to become a health coach, just really seeing how these little changes made such a big difference, not just in my life, but in my husband's life, and then for my children, and just how much more peaceful my life is too. Having these tools, because it really is, it's tools and little tips, and like I call them easy buttons.
I love it. I love it. It's so true. And I think it's something that once we experience that in our own personal journey, we get so excited to share that with others,
Yeah.
right? It sounds like you had this realization now where looking back at yourself at a time when you perhaps had in some ways less on your plate. I wouldn't say that the entrepreneurial journey is really that much less than a 40-hour-a-week job. It's different, right?
Yep.
Uniquely
Yep.
different. But what it requires from us, and then also having now more children, it just requires us to be at that place where we have to operate from a higher level, right? And so
Yep.
for sure, 100%, we need to be sure we're fueling appropriately, putting our own oxygen mask on before we can help other people. And that's going to make the biggest difference in our health. I love that. So good. So let's dive in a little bit to stress because, and I think too, talking a little bit about perhaps how you carried that stress and when you realized that you were very stressed, or perhaps it's more of a hindsight. It's easier to look back at how you were so stressed. But I know you shared with me that you struggled to conceive your second. And this is something that I help women with a lot as they're struggling with, the stress or the inability to conceive, and people well-intending will say things like, oh, just calm down, right? Just don't be stressed. And unfortunately that does nothing to actually reduce our stress. So let's talk a little bit about that, about how you saw that looking back, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So yeah, it's definitely hindsight. When I was living in it, so this was like 2014 to 2015. It's almost like 18 months. And looking back, I can see that I was beyond stressed. Mostly with work. Again, I had one kid, looking back like, whoa, what did I do with my time? I had so much time on my hands, even with my commute. But work was very stressful at that point. I wore, it's a nonprofit, it was a small nonprofit. I wore a ton of different hats, and between that and the toddler, and then we knew we wanted to have our kids close together. So I had put that pressure and that stress on myself of like,
Mm,
okay, we got to have our kids close together. I'm much older than my siblings. And so it was really important to me. I wanted my plan, not God's plan. My plan was to have our kids about 2 years apart. So looking back, I know like our son is just, he's a total gift from God. And, of course the timing was perfect. Um, but looking back, it was definitely the stress I think that really contributed to us not being able to get pregnant for so long. Um, and when 23 months later, after we had him, our daughter was born. So I'm very fortunate that it was not really an infertility issue, because we had no trouble with our girls. But um, I just looking back, I'm like, wow, I needed to relax. I just stop putting the pressure on myself, and I wish I'd had the tools I have now.
yeah.
It
Yeah.
just, they make such a big difference. And I was trying to eat well. I had a lot of those tools in my tool belt, if you will, but uh, the stress piece definitely I did not have.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And, I talk a lot about how those stress hormones are diametrically opposed to our sex hormones, right? So even if
Mm-hmm.
it's just a window of time that you're not making that, adequate progesterone, or you're over producing estrogen, or whatever it is that's going on,
Mm-hmm.
that can cause at least a delay, right? And that can be difficult too. So tell me then, do you have a new definition of stress, so we can maybe kind of shift our perspective a little bit on this?
Yes. And when I learned this definition, I cannot take credit for it. Dr. Heidi Hanna is the
Okay.
one that came up with this definition, and she has so many amazing resources on stress. Um, but when I heard this, it was like a light bulb went off, completely changing the way I think about it. So we're used to hearing stress. I'll read the unhelpful definition. It's the non-specific response to a perceived threat. It doesn't tell me a whole lot, and it's very just blah. Dr. Hanna defines stress as what happens when our demand exceeds our capacity.
Mm,
Stress is the gap between your demand and your capacity. And to me, that is such a hopeful definition. Like we can do something about that.
yeah.
Um, and so thinking, reframing stress as both with that definition, and that stress in some ways is helpful. We have acute stress and chronic stress. The acute stress is helpful. We, slam on the brakes to avoid an accident. Stress can help us focus. We have to get something done. Um, when we exercise, that's creating stress on our body. So stress can be helpful. It's not just this doom and gloom horrible thing. We actually do need some stress. But when we're talking about that chronic stress, that I think when we hear the word stress, that's what most of us are talking about. It's like, okay, yeah, there's a lot of demands on me right now. So how can I either reduce those demands, or how can I increase my capacity? And I just think that's so empowering. Like
Yeah.
we can do something about that.
For sure, 100%. I totally agree. I love that. Now, I think we're learning and understanding more about the way that our brains process stress, whether it's through like from a mindset perspective, right? Like how we mentally imagine the stress. But what are some ways that our brain works uniquely under stress, and maybe some
Mm,
tricks to help us master that in the moment
sure,
stressors?
sure. Well, I'm so glad you brought up the whole perception piece, because that's huge. What stresses me out may not stress you out at all. So just being aware that sometimes we can cause our own stress just by how we're looking at things. But yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that. Perception has a lot to do with it. But our brains, God is so good. He's so amazing how he created our bodies. So our brains process kind of from a bottom up perspective. So when we're talking about stress, we have the brain stem. So like that's called like your lizard brain. I've heard it referred to as the toddler brain too. So this part of your brain, its sole job is to keep you safe all day long, 24/7. Am I safe? Am I safe? So it's like that toddler. Am I safe? Am I safe? Next, once you move out of that, you're in your limbic system. So the monkey brain, that's all of our emotions are there. And I heard this described as the middle schooler. So am I loved? Am I loved? Am I loved? Which I just love that. So we'll start, am I safe? Am I loved? And then once our brain kind of works through those two areas, then we get into the prefrontal cortex and our human brain. And that's when we can have goal setting and where we learn all of our executive function, our problem solving. And then when we're in stress, we are usually not problem solving. When we're in stress, we are usually stuck down in the lizard brain or the monkey brain. So we have to, it's helpful to realize when you are in a stress response, like, okay, what am I questioning my safety? Am I stuck in this emotional place, or am I actually, okay, like I've made it to my prefrontal cortex and now I can problem solve and address the issue. So one of the tips that I learned, again, from Dr. Heidi Hanna that I love to share with my clients is called a BFF. And so everyone needs their BFF, and it stands for breathe, feel, and focus. And so by practicing this BFF, you are working yourself up into your prefrontal cortex so that you can choose what to do next. So B is for breathe. So breathing communicates to your body that you are safe. It activates the parasympathetic nervous system. So it can be 30 seconds, it can be 5 minutes. But just when we are in a stress state, our breathing gets shallow. We're not breathing like we normally do. So that's the first step. The feel, the first F, is really important. And some people skip over this. And I've noticed when I practice a BFF, they are most effective when I really spend time here. So feel, you're in your monkey brain, you're reassuring yourself that you are loved. And the trick here is not to just be like, oh, I'm grateful for my family or I love my husband. It's to really find a moment that you feel. And so maybe it's, the first time your toddler said, love you, or, think of your wedding day or a moment, perhaps you were in church and you just felt this overwhelming love of the Lord. You want to be able to feel it in your body, this love and this gratitude. And so from there, so you've activated the monkey brain. From there, you are calm, you are feeling loved. Now you can focus, the second F. Okay, what do I need to do next in this situation? Do I need to get a snack on the table for the, hangry humans that are driving me crazy? Do I need to buckle down and tackle the next goal at work? It just really helps you to then be a problem solver. And it's pulled you out of that stress state. And it's just, I did one yesterday afternoon. They're just so amazing. I was just like, oh, okay, I can move forward now.
Yeah, I love that. How long does that usually take you?
Oh gosh, anywhere from 30 seconds to 5 minutes.
Okay.
It depends on how anxious I'm feeling. And I've been described as a type A++ personality. So I tend to just slip into stress so easily. And this BFF, practicing it, it's not like medicine. It's more like a vitamin. So you have to practice it when you're calm, so that when you are stressed, you know what to do.
For sure. Oh, that's so beautiful. I love that. And so important. I think sometimes I think a lot of, especially looking back at the way I used to be, that I would be, running with the kids and getting them out the door, and I'd sit in the car and I put my hands on the wheel and I go, ah. Yeah. And I realized it's because I hadn't been breathing, right? I've been breathing all day, right? Just these short chest breaths. And anytime you're do that, then right, we're going to continually spiral in this reactive. And I think I was such a more impatient mother. I was so much
Mm.
shorter with little people being little. But it truly is just that rewiring our body and saying, like, no, we actually can pause and take 5 seconds and take just a couple
Mhm.
deep breaths
Yeah.
and know, like, reassure our body that we're safe so that we're not
Mhm.
snapping and yelling at people. And
Yep.
right. But I love that, like, really walking back through that, because it's so important to dive deep into that, that psychology, right, of what's going
Mhm.
on and why we are doing the things that we're doing, right? Because we all have those things that we get so frustrated with ourselves, like, why am
Mhm.
I this way? Why must I do this all the time?
Mhm.
But that's part of it. We need to kind of go back and walk ourselves through that, but also then in that process be mindful of what comes up, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, as you're saying, like, am I safe, am I safe, am I safe, am I loved, am I loved? If we're always telling ourselves we're not worthy of love, or we're
Mhm.
not safe, in that subconscious brain, then it's going to be even more difficult to be able to do this. So I think
Mhm.
that's a caution I would say to people that are watching this later too, is if you find yourself struggling there, you really need to find somebody that can help you work through that process, because that is
Absolutely.
a skill I believe the Lord is asking us to acquire so that we can
Mhm.
give more fully, live more fully. And that's kind of going back to, like, the very, very beginning, what we said about putting your oxygen mask on. Like, that has
Yeah.
to be done first before we can get to that focus and planning and forward thinking and dreaming, right? That the Lord
Mhm.
wants us to
Yeah.
do. So good. I love it. Um, any other tips you have for us? What else can we do to help our
Oh,
body in this stress response?
one of the things I love to do, I don't know if you or your listeners have heard of an amygdala hijack.
No.
Um, and I first heard this term during the pandemic when, the news was just, everything's coming at you. But basically, uh, the amygdala is a little almond-shaped part of your brain, so that's in your limbic system, in your monkey brain, and that's what manages emotions. And so when we get stuck there, it's not a happy place to be. And usually, when we are having a strong stress response, sorry, my computer is doing something very weird. Um, Sorry about that. I have to
You're
edit
good. I didn't see anything.
that. um, I can't really see my note. Okay, there we go.
Yeah,
Um,
you're good.
so when we are having these big emotions, fear, anger, really, really big emotions, we're often stuck there. And so we can't move into that problem solving mode and calm ourselves down. We can feel, I don't know, for me, I get this almost jittery feeling in my chest. Sometimes, you might start sweating or feel really jumpy, lots of different things like that. So noticing in your body. So to escape an amygdala hijack, nobody wants to stay stuck there. That first step, the first tip I share is to just acknowledge and just be like, whoa, I am feeling all the feels right now. Like, what? Something is going on. And just pausing. And again, it doesn't have to be 5 minutes. It can take you 2 seconds to just be like, oh gosh, okay, I'm stuck here right now. And the next step is to breathe. Again, breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system. It communicates to your body that you're safe. And when I use the term safe too, it could be, I'm not just talking about physical danger. Um, Maybe your kids are just being really loud and your body is overwhelmed and your brain is going to think you're not safe because your brain associates lots of loud noises with danger. So it could just be, you're not feeling safe because your kids are fighting downstairs and, there's lots of screaming going on. So just acknowledging and then breathing and kind of pulling yourself back, just taking some deep breaths. And then the most helpful tip for escaping an amygdala hijack is to move your body. It is really amazing what exercise does. And I'm not talking a full workout. I have just gone down into my basement to hide from my family and done jumping jacks. It doesn't have to be, anything fancy, but the act of moving your body communicates to your brain like you have to focus on doing the exercises. So you can't necessarily focus on all the big emotions and the stress of the moment. and I like to reassure people too, it does not have to be cardio. So if you cannot jump or do kind of high intense exercise, it can be as simple as doing movements where your arms cross the midline of your body, because your brain has to concentrate differently when you do that. So even if you are in a car and you can't necessarily get up and exercise, as long as you have a hand on the wheel, you could even do that. And that is sometimes enough to get your brain out of that amygdala hijack.
Yeah, I love that. Also to burn that cortisol, right? That
Mm-hmm.
cortisol surging in our system. It wants to react. It wants to fight from a
Yes.
bear. It wants to
Yep.
run. And so just burning up some of that excess energy that we
Mm-hmm.
have in those moments. So true. And
Mm-hmm.
I think too, that's even something where I notice for me personally, if I'm trying to work through something or be creative or think about something and I just can't see the solution, if I just stop and go for a 5-minute walk, right? Even just go
Mm-hmm.
get right? Just like
Yep.
up and down the stairs, go get the mail,
Yep.
like come back
Something.
in. I just feel my heart's pumping a little bit, right? Like I just feel like I can sit down and see things differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
Than if I just sat there and tried to plow through.
Oh yeah, for
Help
sure.
myself out of
For
it.
sure.
I think another thing I like to bring up too when we're talking about stress is that all of these different sources of stress, right? This, how you're processing things mentally, how you're fueling your body, but also like past spiritual trauma, right? Things that
Mm-hmm.
trigger us that continue to cause new emotions from
Mm-hmm.
old wounds, right? But also then physiologically what's going on, right? If your
Mm-hmm.
blood sugar is dysregulated, we all know that hangry, anxious, jittery feeling, right?
Mm-hmm.
You alluded to that earlier, but that can contribute to our
Mm-hmm.
stress load. And also things that are going on internally, right? If your gut really needs to be healed, if you've got leaky gut and you've got food sensitivities or you've got anything else going on, that's going to also contribute to this. So I think it's important to throw that in there with a conversation about stress, because I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we just think like my job is stressful and I can't quit my job, so I'm just going to be stressed. But
Mm-hmm.
we need to definitely go back through this framework you gave us, the BFF, to see how there could be other ways that we could solve that same problem. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you're at a place where you just need to try to baby step into some healthier foods. Maybe you're in
Mm-hmm.
a place that you're like, I can't do anything about these external factors, but I could heal my gut. Right. Or I
Right.
could do
Mm-hmm.
something else that maybe you didn't even realize is contributing to that stress load.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's spiritual healing. That's where
Mm-hmm.
you are right now that you really need. But just
Mm-hmm.
knowing that there are other things, it doesn't just have to look this one way,
Yes.
which I think we oftentimes kind of think of stress in a
Mm-hmm.
proverbial box.
Right. No, I'm so glad you mentioned that, Rita. And a lot of the things you were talking about are ways to increase our capacity.
Yeah.
So again, yeah, we feel like it can all be very outside of us, but
Yeah.
there are so many things that we can do
Yeah,
to address that.
definitely. Yeah.
And
Oh,
we're
I
all
love.
unique. So,
Yes, for sure. Yeah, in the ways we carry that. And
mm-hmm.
years ago, I did the women's school. I don't know if you're familiar with that,
Mm-hmm.
Jana. And I just loved the way that January Donovan in the women's school talked about, if we look around our house all the time, we say, I'm so overwhelmed, I'm so overwhelmed, I'm so overwhelmed. I have all these things, all these people, all this food, right? Whatever it is you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, it's just, life's a little bit of a dance party. Right. And now,
I
like
love
when I
that.
have someone come in my home and we homeschool and there's people everywhere, my husband and I both work at home, right? These people come in my house and look at me like I'm crazy. Like your kids keep popping up out of the woodwork. And I just embrace that now. Like, yeah, it's a little
Mm-hmm.
bit of a dance party. Like,
I
and
love it.
it's interesting how even someone else coming in from the home feels that differently. Right. I think of
Mm-hmm.
that, like if if I showed up at the door in my pajamas, which no judgment if you stay in your pajamas all day, but like, right, it just is different if
Mm-hmm.
I present it all through that lens of like, you know what, this is good, we've got this is just our life, it's busier than most, and that's fine. It changes everything, right, from
Yeah.
me to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in communicating that, it almost reminds me of just reminding yourself how blessed you are.
Yeah.
So, okay, I've got all these kids to homeschool. Wow, I'm so blessed that I have these kids to homeschool. Oh my gosh, my husband and my husband and I do work back to back. We share an office.
Yeah.
So, oh my gosh, I'm so blessed that I get to spend so much time with my
Yeah,
husband.
it's true.
Just taking those little things that might be causing you some stress, and seeing how you can reframe them into blessings. Not to kind of push it under the rug. We definitely want to acknowledge the feelings and handle them, but it can be so helpful from that perception point to look at your blessings too.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. And finding ways that we can give gratitude, even if it's hard, right? Even if it doesn't seem like a natural way to find gratitude in a situation. Yeah, I love that so much. So how can people find you on social media or your website?
Yeah, so everything is At the Well Coaching. So my website, atthewellcoaching.com, and all social media, Facebook, Instagram. I joined Threads. I haven't done anything on there yet, but still At the Well Coaching.
Yeah, so good. And I'll put those links in the description for this video. So awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, Jana. This was so great. For anybody that enjoys hearing about this, I do have a short video series on my YouTube channel all about stress. There's 3 parts to it. And I talk about it through a slightly different lens. So if you are struggling with a concept, always feel free to reach out to Jana or myself. But also take a look at those and see if that helps you a little bit too, to picture stress a little differently and how you can move forward in your health and fertility journey. So thank you so much, Jana. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too, Rita.